do your job in expanding the classroom. So make sure that you tag, text, remind everybody, because sometimes people are not being notified that the class is on. So we have Dr. Nicole LePera in the classroom. And so it's time for you guys to let people know the wonderful information that we're going to be discussing today. So I'm going to start the recorder so that we can do our podcast and BitChute. So here we go. So today is an exciting day. Look at this. I have an advanced copy of this book it's going to be birth on March 9th. That is the date of birth of this beautiful work with Dr. Michelle LePera. So we're going to learn about how to do the work today, not just talk about it. So fasten your seatbelt. It's time to learn and grow together. Here we go. It's time to dance.
The Lillian McDermott Show.
We love, we fear, bridges we burn, we make mistakes, then we live and learn. When life gets tough, and it seems like your best ain't good enough. If you're in need of hope, you know where I'll be right here. Right here, and when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here, waiting for
you. This is the place you can always turn to when you need a friend. The Lillian McDermott Show. To reach out to Lillian, visit her on the web at whenyouneedafriend.com. Now let's all learn together. Here's Lillian McDermott.
Hello, my listening and viewing friend. It's so nice we can meet each other on the air on this beautiful, best day ever. And for those of you who are tuning into the classroom for the first time, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go to when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide alternative ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening, as well as my viewing friend, will feel empowered to live the life of your dreams and embrace a new truth, not necessarily in that order. Sometimes you have to embrace a new truth in order to live the life of your dreams. So today, as a certified life coach, I hear this all the time. I want to change. I want things to change. I want them to change. But the reality is that most people stop right there. They just stop at talking about it. Well, we're very lucky because we have Dr. Nicole LePera, and she wrote the book, How to Do the Work. As you can tell, I've got some markers in here because it's a wonderful way for you to take your health back, to take responsibility back, to live the life that you want. And so Dr. Nicole LePera has been doing this work. She's created this for you so that you can be a self-healer too. As what we talk about in the classroom is a self-cleaning oven, but you can hashtag the next part, which is self-healer. And so she's going to teach us how to recognize patterns, heal from the past, and create yourself. And since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am grateful that Dr. Nicole LePera is here to do just that. Welcome to the classroom.
Thank you so much for having me, Lillian.
Well, you have come a long way. Like they say, you've come a long way, baby. And so you started with one path and it's led you to where you're at today. So share a little bit about your background, your education, and what brought you to being holistic.
Absolutely. And I have to say, from your song to your intro words, I was getting goosebumps over here because there's just such alignment, especially around this idea of empowering the self.
Yes.
And my journey actually toward my own personal empowerment, and now my hope is to empower the collective around me, actually came from the depths of disempowerment. As long as I can remember, I'm a human who had a very intimate relationship with anxiety. It's all I really have ever known. As long as I can remember being the little girl, afraid of thumps in the night, worried about the next health issue that might, cause my parents' illness or issue. Very intuitively, always remember being really fascinated with people, namely with what made people similar to myself and what made people dissimilar to myself. So before long, I was reading all of the books about humans and the mind and the brain, and I entered into the field of psychology with the hopes of creating change, of helping people, including myself, who was struggling with, psychological diagnoses, to create change, to get better, essentially. Several years into my practice, like I said earlier, I actually started to feel really, really disempowered. Not only was I continuing to struggle, by that point, I had felt I had accumulated a lot of insight. I had learned all of the tools and techniques. I had self-analyzed myself, if you will, as they say. I was in my own therapy. I was putting together the pieces, yet I still couldn't create change. I wasn't able to actually get better. I still had anxiety. I was still feeling really unfulfilled in relationships. And if I'm honest, in my life in general, even though from the outside, I had checked all of the boxes. I had done all the things that I had imagined were part of what I wanted to do in life. So here I was, I'd arrived, and yet I wasn't feeling like I had arrived really anywhere. And what really solidified it for me was seeing these same patterns in my clients, seeing week after week, incredibly insightful people I was working with that would come in again week after week with a similar report of stuckness. Oh, Nicole, I knew what I should have done differently in that moment, yet I can't. Or I was unable to continue with this new habit that we had both decided in session would be really helpful. So from that low point, I really dove into first research, and my mind was blown, Lillian, of all of this new research that was out there in the world. The first of which that really knocked open the door for me was around this new idea of science, of epigenetics, this reality that we can actually create change. Because from that point, from my whole life up until that point, I really felt like I was limited. I was limited by my genetics. I was limited by the conditions I was born into. I was limited by the life experiences I had accumulated. All I heard was narratives of limitation, and it mapped on to the science I was taught, to the reality that we did believe for a very long time that our genetics were our destiny. So for me, that really shook my foundation to its core, but it opened a door. And from there, I began to question. I began to dive into new research, really understanding the role that our physical body plays, our nervous system in particular, in keeping us stuck in those habits and patterns despite the insight. So before long, I really began to understand the need to shift the way I was thinking about not only myself, but about humans in general, from this idea that we're a separate mind to we're an interconnected being. We have a mind, we have a body. I believe essence, this undefinable thing that really embodies our uniqueness. And from there, I really made the commitment to begin to speak this truth and to put this information out there, obviously using social media, for those who know me as the holistic psychologist, as first an exercise in my own healing, as my first opportunity to begin to say these things, to begin to share my journey in this new way that I hadn't been doing for a very long time.
Well, and I found it really interesting as I was reading your story in your book, how this realization that you needed to get out there and do more was over crying over a bowl of oatmeal. Who can't relate crying over a bowl of oatmeal? At that moment, you realize, in a situation like that, that all these people that have been presenting themselves to you with they're stuck, is because we get to realize that that is the universe or God bringing us the fact that we need to work on these things. The people that present themselves in front of, I call Dr. I don't know if you know who Dr. Lorraine Day is, but she always pokes me in the eye. She always pokes me in the eye. And at first I may not like and now I'm used to it, like poke me, baby. I want to be poked, because it's information that just feeds the soul. That it's the truth, that these new truths that feed our soul. And so you were able to do that at the most, unbelievable moment where you thought that this was just a little vacation, but it wasn't, right?
Yeah, at that moment, I didn't know what I had found so upsetting. I was actually reading a book I thought I was reading a book for my clinical practice to help me work with
Your beach read, what you call a beach
right, my
read.
yeah, and it was about emotionally unavailable mothers. And again, I had been reading it through the lens of, okay, let me understand my clients who have emotionally unavailable mothers so that I can help them better. Lo and behold, I'm a tearful mess in my oatmeal. Not necessarily, though, in that moment did I come to the awareness of why. I wasn't like, oh, I'm crying because I had an emotionally unavailable mother. I think what you're speaking to is that resistance. I did not want to face that truth for a very long time. As I began to pull back, as I say, the layers of conditioning of the onion, there were a lot of moments of truths that were either, I was becoming aware of by observing myself, and or the people around me, my very loving partner, right, as often they do, would begin to just point things out from her very much more objective vantage point, quite simply because she's not me.
Correct.
And if I'm honest, talk about poking in the eye, I wanted to punch her in the face
Yeah.
each and every time she would offer me in a very loving way,
Yeah.
just observations. Hey, Nicole, every time, we have a plan with your family for a particular weekend, several days before that plan, you're irritable. When we're at your family event, which she would join me at, you're a nightmare. And when you come home, right, there's a lot of tension in the home. And she would very gently just try to point out that patterning to me. And I didn't want to hear it. So you'll hear me talk often about, learning how to embrace our truth. And because for us, it really does, it's an individual process first. As we pull back our onion, there's a lot of uncomfortable things that we bear witness to. So before we can share our truth with the world, as I then committed myself to do on the Instagram account, I had a lot of reckoning that happened behind the scenes. So like I said, it didn't happen into that bowl of oatmeal. I resisted that truth for a very long time, as I did many other truths, until I was able to embrace the discomfort that came along with me witnessing myself in those conditioned patterns.
Yeah, yeah. And for those of you who are tuning in and you want to follow Dr. LePera, you can find her on Instagram. She has over 3 million followers. Did you ever think that this would happen?
Not in a million years, Lillian. So I will share that my first I had two intentions. So I was coming to my truth. I was, doing the work of healing, and I was creating amazing change in my life, specifically around my anxiety. For the first time ever, it wasn't just about managing. I was actually starting to feel different levels of peace in my body and in my mind. So I knew I wanted to begin to talk about it in some way. I saw, obviously, the online world was being utilized by all of these different people and sharing their truth. So I decided, okay, this could be a space where I can begin to experiment. And my two intentions at that time were to speak my truth, coming through a system and also a family system where I was conditioned to filter my truth. For me, it was based on my fear of how my truth would affect the receiver or the listener. Meaning, for a very long time, if I worried that what I said would hurt someone else in any way or would be uncomfortable for someone to hear, I would modify and I would say essentially what I thought they wanted to hear from me or what would keep the peace in that moment. So through that intention, that for me was an exercise for me in my healing. Can I create a space with it being challenging? Of course, every post I would put up, I would, oh gosh, how's that going to go? My second intention was to begin to find the humans to create some new relationships, because as I began my healing journey, I began to evaluate, as many of us do, relationships in our lives. We're interpersonal creatures. Most of our time is spent relating to others. And what I began to see in terms of my relationships, I began to change. I began to show up differently, and I began to feel lonely. And I began to feel like I wanted newer, authentic connections, not ones where I was my old self, right? Just modifying, wearing masks, amending to keep the peace, but new relationships where I could be me. And I could have that space held to be in my full expression. I had no anticipation, though, Lillian, that there would be so many people receiving this information in resonance, hearing either my story, my journey thus far, or my journey in healing, and relating to it. And the second I saw that it was actually an international relatability, I really began to understand that these were quite universal truths that were creating change in the world. And then I
Mhm.
became obviously even more convicted to stay in that arena and to continue to speak, even when it got difficult, as it does when you're as present and on social media as those of us who are.
Yes, yes. And so I want to remind all of you that we're going to give away 3 of these books, and this is how you do it. You need to claim your life back. Wherever you're listening to or watching or whatever, you send it, write it there if you can in the comment section. I'm taking my life back and I'm doing the work. And then text me at 407-373-5959. Once you text me, because you see, people want things, but they don't want to you don't want to do the work. So you got to claim it, and then you text me. If you don't text me, then you're not serving the whole commitment. So you text me 407-373-5959. Your name will be placed in a winner's basket, because everyone who texts me is a winner of awareness. You've become aware that this is what you want. That's the first step. And so then I will draw 3 names out of these. So 3 winners for this. But if you don't get selected, you can always go to Amazon to get the book starting March 9th. And I'm so proud of you. This is a great, I've been writing a book, and so I know how it's going to feel. I can just feel your excitement as well, that this baby has popped out of you and it's about to be revealed on March 9th. And so congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. It definitely does feel like a birth. And I was joking with you beforehand, saying right down to the lack of sleep that's coming along with whether it's the excitement or the fear or everything kind of mashed up in one that I've just been feeling. I'm really excited, though, for it to live in the world, for it to find the people who it's meant to find wherever they are on their journey. I love
Yes.
that aspect of your work, too, kind of you're where you need to be. And here we are together. And I love that aspect. So
And
I'm
I
so
and I
grateful for this
and I
book.
have to thank Brooke. She's the creative director of the classroom. She was the one that brought me to you. And I'm sure many people bring their friends to you because we want to be aligned with the same way of thinking and understanding one another. As a matter of fact, as I was reading your book at the beginning, when you were expressing, you didn't know why you were crying. You're just reading a book, and all of a sudden you're crying. And all I kept thinking was Romans 8. Romans 8, I don't know if you know that scripture verse in the Bible, but the Romans 8, basically, there's a certain areas. The main thing that we know Romans 8 for is God works things out for the good of all. And that we know. And then, but there's a section there in Romans 8 that I love, which is even when you don't understand what to say, the soul knows. So that dark night of the soul that you described was so appropriate, because your soul, your spirit knew to cry out. And that's when we have that connection with a much higher power, whatever anybody calls it. And so I recognized that in you. And I thought, this is so beautiful that this all came out of a need within you. And all these people that presented themselves that were stuck helped you discover where you were stuck too. And so let's talk about that anxiety that you were feeling, that your partner would say to you, please be aware that before you meet your family, this happens. And these are patterns that we recognize in ourselves. What do you recommend? So let's talk about your principles and how do people get unstuck? They know that maybe there's something trapped in their body, and maybe they don't know that there's something trapped in your body. Like that emotion of your mom was released at that moment without you even knowing it was released. So what is your advice for someone who's still in resistance and doesn't want to just release that so that beauty comes in from that?
The foundation, and I think we both kind of gestured toward this concept that I go on and on about, typically on a daily basis at this point. In my opinion, the foundation to create any change in our life, or even to become aware of the points that we're stuck around, if you are that person who's maybe unsure, is through creating or cultivating a new foundational, daily, consistent practice of being conscious to ourselves, to our internal world, and to how we are showing up in our external world. Because the large majority of us are not actually showing up in the moment, day in, day out, in a conscious state. We're actually upwards of, depending on whom you read, 90% of our day, we are operating out of our subconscious autopilot, which is a very reactive space, which is actually a space in our mind that holds all of the wounding, all of those suppressed emotions that you very beautifully referenced that can come pouring out, sometimes even unaware to us of the why, as I experienced, all of that lives in a deep recess of our mind. And if we are not conscious, that is the contributor of keeping us in that Groundhog's Day. Because another aspect of our subconscious, which keeps us stuck, and this is a very frustrating, I think, aspect of it for many of us who logically can't understand it. It evolves around the familiar. The familiar to our subconscious is that which is the safest place to be, because we've been there before. In the uncertainty of what could happen next, there could be threat that happens next. So we have a pull to stay in those familiar ruts, essentially, those neural networks that live in our subconscious. So the clients, myself included, can be really frustrated because logically, many of us can trace how our habits and patterns aren't serving us, can make a commitment to change them. Yet when we try to show up embodying these new experiences, many of us experience what I call resistance, which is a pull to go right back into that familiar. And the reason why I speak about the physiology and that subconscious space is because we can carry a lot of shame or a lot of feelings of brokenness or inevitability. Oh, I'm living this life because nothing else is possible in my world. And I'm here to suggest otherwise, to suggest we're all living in that habitual reactive space. And the pathway out is by creating a new habit of consciousness.
Okay. So with that anxiety, when you are facing, okay, I'm recognizing this in me, but you're aware and you're recognizing it. And as I was doing research for you, and as I was looking at your book, there has to be a mindset that occurs for you to say, I'm recognizing this, because people will react and respond without even knowing, because now they're filtering the world with their trauma lenses. So how do they get into that practice of being less reactive and more reflective?
For many of us, when we want to begin to practice consciousness, we're not going to be able to practice it in that moment, in real time. That's typically where change happens last, in that moment where I'm activated emotionally. And I know that that old habit of screaming and yelling or shutting down doesn't work in my relationships for me anymore. That's where I really want to create the change. However, to set ourselves up to succeed in that moment, I am of the belief that we have to create a consistent habit of knowing how to tune into that conscious mind, because the power of our emotions and all of our emotional hardware in our mind is incredibly powerful. So we need to begin the practice of consciousness outside of those moments. We need to create a commitment or set a small daily promise, which is an intention to do something new and different each and every day. And it could be really helpful to do it outside of a moment where we're anticipating being activated. Set the alarm a minute or two earlier and create some space in the morning or before bed, before the world is coming at us, so that I can then learn how to harness my power of consciousness and expand it so that I can then remain conscious when that pull gets really stronger. And I share this because I'm like many of us, we like to do things only when we need to. I want to just do this new thing in the moment so that I don't, elicit that old reaction, as opposed to creating the habits, the lifestyle habits. That's what we're really talking about changing when we're talking about harnessing epigenetics, or actually just transforming in our life. It's not just one moment here and there. It's how can I be, for the point of this conversation, consistently conscious. And the way that I can begin is to practice when I'm not emotionally activated. So finding the space in my day where I can harness my conscious mind. So just to be clear, what that means really simply is present moment awareness. And we have two portals to that present moment. If we can learn how to flex our muscle of attention, essentially when we discover it's not in my present moment because I'm lost in thought, worrying about yesterday or fearing tomorrow, if I can hook my attention on my breath, if I'm breathing anyway in that moment, or in my sensory experience of the moment, can I tune into what I'm touching, tasting, smelling? And when I can use that muscle of attention and refocus on either of those actions, I can embody my physical presence and be present in the here and now.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. It's, you're basically saying set yourself up for success before. Like I know, and I've used this example before, that if I'm going to go work out in the morning, if I don't take my workout clothes at night, I'm just giving it lip service. I know that I'll start thinking, okay, well, I'll be waking people up if I do go through my drawers to try to get, and I know that I am intended to work out, not the when I'm waking up and dragging out of bed. It's the night before that we set that. So I like, it's interesting. As I was reading your book, I'm thinking, this is wonderful. I'm sure that we've learned, because you were classically trained. You could be, I've had people say to me, 30 years of talk therapy have not done what this one small realization has done to taking responsibility and taking ownership for whatever that is, has done. And so I'm sure that once you started switching the way you started showing up, then you gave permission to others show up that way too.
Yeah, and that happened not only in my personal relationships, but it extends outward.
Hmm.
You'll always hear me talk about modeling and how powerful
Hmm.
modeling can be. Usually, I speak of this in the context of parenting, where I hear from a lot of parents who want to know how to instruct. How do I tell my kid, or how do I teach, right, my kid to do differently, very well intentionally, so that they don't, suffer the pain that I've suffered.
Hmm.
However, my response is always some version of the same, which is to model it for you to begin doing differently. And this, in my opinion, applies even outside of parenting relationships to all. So, to
Hmm.
speak to what you were talking about in the beginning, I, like many of us, have gone through life imagining if the world changed, I could have a different experience. And obviously, I've pointed right to my partners, or the people in my relationship to be that change. However,
Hmm.
living this process of healing, I began to understand that if I wanted my relationships to change, I had to begin to show up differently. So, modeling is the most powerful teacher, not only for others, but for ourselves. It is only through living the experience of doing something different, of creating change in our beliefs and our way of being, that we can truly shift our beliefs about its possibility.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I know that you quote Bruce Lipton, or I remember you're talking about belief, and he was my biggest teacher back in 2013. I had just started digging into this, and I remember I was able to interview him. He was only going to give me 15 minutes, and it turned out to be 1.5 hours, which was just phenomenal with Bruce Lipton. But the biology of belief, was that something that they taught you in school as you were getting your PhD, or is that something that you had to go outside to learn about when you were going through the process of your transformation?
I was taught the power of thought in my program through the model of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's really the gold standard, the most quote unquote empirically validated, mainly because it can be systematized and studied in that way. That's obviously a deeper conversation. However, that's really based on the premise of change your thoughts, right? Change how you feel and how you then operate your being
Yeah.
in the world.
First a thought, there's a feeling, it's an
Right.
action. There you go.
And I hear a lot of people who have met that theory and or who have tried to work with affirmations or mantras, which are really just new thoughts, and
Hmm.
who've landed feeling very disempowered and frustrated.
Hmm.
So really beginning to understand why, I understood, yes, I have a whole chapter in my own book called The Power of Belief,
Yes.
really understanding how beliefs impact us in life.
Hmm.
However, in terms of the holistic model that I offer, it's really understanding why thought alone can't create the change that many of us
Right.
are seeking. And again, it's because we're a unified creature. We can change our thoughts. They, however, are communicating with a body. And if our body is in some state of dysregulation, those signals of dysregulation or lack of alignment are being sent up then to our mind. So until we harness the whole system again, the mind, body, and soul, um, thoughts and belief change only go so far.
Hmm.
So it wasn't necessarily taught. I don't believe in the most impactful way. I don't think it becomes impactful until, like I said, we really honor all of the different operating systems
Hmm.
essentially that are contributing to our stuckness, our
Yeah.
body being the major contributor to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like doctors that I've interviewed in the classroom, they receive 3 hours during their whole program that they're learning how to heal others and actually prescribe medication to others. They're so, they're supposed to say nutrition, but their nutrition that they've learned about is like, they're basically about to manage their medication, not to manage. They're going to assume you're going to fail doing that, so they go straight to the management of medication. So I hear what you're saying when it comes to putting it into action. It's difficult for people. They want to do it, they just don't know. And that's why, and by the way, guys, 3 of you are going to win one of these books. So you need to claim it. And already you guys are texting me, but you also need to write it. You can, if you have any questions, type in a Q, write your questions, because we're going to still have a teacher's pet corner. So 3 of you claim it wherever you're at right now, claim it. And then text me at 407-373-5959. I'm going to wait till Monday because I want to give people the opportunity that are listening on podcasts, watching on BitChute as well as YouTube and Facebook, to have the opportunity for 3 of these books. And so since we do have until the 9th anyway, so I'm just really excited that Dr. Nicole LePera is here today. And, we're talking about such an important topic because many of us are stuck. We're stuck because we just don't know what else to do. We understand it, but we don't know what else to do. And what Dr. LePera does is that she teaches you how to do it. A lot of people hoard information, but it's so wonderful when you see someone who is willing to give it away for free. And it's up to you to decide what you want to do. Same thing with the classroom. We talk about in the classroom, all the teachers in the classroom that help us look at ourself, spirit, mind, and body, more than just someone who works or more than someone who is a mom or a dad or a spirit or a mind or a body. We're more than that. And so I want to encourage you to go to whenyounneedafriend.com. As I mentioned before, the algorithms in the classroom have been garbled up, so it's up to you to help out. And if by chance you go in and you don't see me anymore, you'll know where to go. Go to whenyounneedafriend.com. Please subscribe while you're there. And when you do, you get all sorts of free gifts and opportunities to get discounts. So go there, like and follow all my social media, my YouTube and BitChute as well. And while you're there, check out my sponsors, because without my sponsors, there would be no classroom. It's getting costlier to do the classroom as a result of all the parameters that are being placed upon us. So check out my sponsors like Keep Me Safe Organics, beauty products. They're all organic, head to toe. First Alternative Care Telemedicine, $19.99 for your entire household. That's medical as well as dermatology, and 3 hours a year of behavioral health counseling for $19.99 per household. The pharmacy in Merritt Island, taking pills and putting it topically as compounds. Just mention my name, 20% off. Dr. Geyer Wellness Group in Indy Atlantic, making you as beautiful on the inside as out. Right Way Health and Wellness in Georgia. They come onto the classroom once a month to share their information of how important it is to heal your lymphatic system and beyond. Also, we have affiliate programs like Ground Therapy, Brain Tap, First Alternative Care, First Alternative Therapy like Avasia, and B3 Science Bands. I'm getting some muscle here. I'm getting my muscle here with 2 pounds. I mean, I'm not even showing that very well, but it's pretty impressive on this end with just 2 pounds. Go check out the B3 Sciences blood flow restriction band and support the sponsors like they're supporting the classroom. And last but not least, you can become an enrolled student in the classroom. You can donate $1 or $1,000 a month, whatever it is that you can do, or you can help with your time, your talent, your treasure to help spread the good news about the classroom. Finally, I want to encourage you to go to Dr. Nicole LePera's classes, where she shares all her information too at yourholisticspsychologist.com. That's yourholisticspsychologist.com. The book comes out on March 9th, but 3 of you are going to win a copy. I think I'll wait till, what do you think, Dr. LePera? Should I just say, I'll do March 9th because and honor March 9th. I'm going to draw 3 names, but you've got to claim it. This will give you time to think about this and take an action, not just the thought, like Dr. LePera says. Just a thought, if you just think it, it's not going to necessarily manifest itself if you don't do anything about it. So the action is, you need to text me at 407-373-5959. If you can't text me, you can email me at lily@whenyounneedafriend.com. But 3 of you are going to win one of these books. So today, Dr. LePera, we are so grateful that you are coming on to talk about your book. This is such important because many of us are walking around feeling stuck, feeling disempowered, feeling that they don't matter, or whatever is that voice in their head that keeps repeating. But you offer hope as well. And that's what I loved about, I'm so grateful to Brooke for introducing me to you. And I'm sure that I would have eventually, with all the 3 million people that are following you right now, why write the book now? Why, with everything that you're doing, why give yourself that stress to add the book? And you didn't have to do this, but you did. So why did choose it now?
After I saw on Instagram the universal resonance and talk about hope, I'm always shouting out the self healer community, which is very engaged on that Instagram account and has been from day one, because it is the community often that has offered me not only the support, the validation, though the hope. Hearing these healing stories from humans who have lived many different circumstances than my own, creating change in their life is endlessly inspirational to me. So to speak to your point about, free platforms and putting content out there, the Instagram and having that access is so near and dear to my heart. I'm very aware of the many of us in the world who don't have access to this information or to these sort of practitioners. So offering it for free out there is always going to be part of what I do.
Sure.
However, as I began to put my little squares out there and my captions out there and kind of to compare that with the whole theory of a holistic wellness that I was formulating, I really began to see the need for a more comprehensive format, for where I could take a reader, should they wish, through not only the concepts of what I mean when I talk about holistic healing, mind, body, and soul, and understanding again our deeper patterns and how our past continues to inform our present. Though I think it's really important and included in the book is taking those concepts. Each chapter, actually, the concepts of each chapter are translated into an actual action plan, whether
I love
that's
it.
consciousness building exercise that I gave you a glimpse into one of those, to breath work, an incredibly powerful regulator of our physiological bodies, to journal prompts, etc. So for me, the book, like I said, is the comprehensive. I think of it like a handbook. I think of it again, meeting people where they're at in their journeys. And I hope it becomes something that people can live with, meaning, reading it, living with it, maybe putting it down, and then revisiting aspects of it as your journey evolves. Because something I've also learned about healing is, what's the cliche saying that we all love to hate? It's not linear. There isn't a stepwise format where I do these 5 things day in and day out and I get better. Our journeys look very different. Right? There's stops and starts. There's different tools and techniques that will work differently for each of us. So the book, I hope, kind of honors that and allows people to go and to heal at their own pace.
Yeah. And, and I love Allie's story as you share. Would you like to share a little bit about Allie's story? Because it is our story. Allie's story is our story because we've been told a bunch of lies that we've believed. And once you discover these new truths, more new truths uncover themselves as well.
So speaking of my community, yes, Allie is someone very near and dear to my heart, that I speak about often, who's also included her journey very graciously in the book. So Allie is a human who was really struggling pretty debilitating symptoms of multiple sclerosis. I mean, she was at the point, I think she was somewhere in her 20s even, so quite young, where her and her family were planning for her long-term care under the belief that there would be a time in her life, barely in the very near future, where she would be unable to care for herself, because of the continuous disintegration in sense of her physical body.
Mhm.
And one day she came across one of my memes and began to follow my work and then the work itself. And
Mhm.
Allie began her journey, as unbelievable as this might sound for some of you listening, with one glass of water, with a daily commitment to drink one glass of water right when she woke up, before anything else happened, before her coffee, even, each and every day. And the reason why the promise for some of you listening might sound so small is because of something we talked about earlier. We don't actually want to change. And those of us have lived this experience probably pretty intimately, when you've maybe set a to-do list where your life's going to be different tomorrow from top to bottom. I'm going to do all these new things.
Mhm.
And before long, again, what we do is we create another system of overwhelm. Changing too quickly is actually quite difficult for us as humans. So I always speak of the need, or I suggest taking and breaking down our promises into something as small as one glass of water. Because what I understand is it's not about the glass of water, it's about rebuilding trust in the self. Because so many of us, because we haven't been able to build that bridge from insight into action, we suffer from what I call self betrayal. We don't trust ourselves. We don't believe ourselves when we say we're going to be committed to this new lifestyle in any way. So, Allie's journey began with one glass of water. Now, I mean, she's so beyond that. She's healed her body. She's off of medication for MS. She's now doing transformational work herself, very visibly online. And I am just so inspired by Allie each and every day. So she is, I think, like you said, she's each and every one of us. And
Mhm.
there's so many other stories of humans like Allie who have created incredible transformation in their life, starting with just one small daily promise.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that she would find herself to Dr. Terry Walls. Dr. Terry Walls has been a teacher in the classroom many, many times. And some people say, I've got this diagnosis. And again, that kind of alleviates their responsibility of taking action in their life, because now they have a diagnosis and they buy into the diagnosis. But she didn't buy into the diagnosis. Maybe she did at the beginning, but that action of drinking water revealed more things for her. And I think that if we all take that one step of courage, which only takes I watched a movie called, I love giving credit where credit is due, so this is not from me, but I watched a movie called We Bought a Zoo. And that, I don't remember much about the movie. All I remember is this one line: all it takes is 20 seconds of courage to take the first step. Sometimes we get so overwhelmed that, we're going to climb a mountain, we're going to start at the top of the mountain. No, we start with a glass of water, or we start with buying a pair of shoes. That is how simply it is. And you simplify that for us so that we can take that first 20-second step.
Yeah, and it is often that first step that we resist taking, because we create all of these imagined scenarios of all of the things that will start to shift and change in our life if we change. And for the majority of us, that is accurate. Some things do shift and change. So within the process of transformation, and I speak about this a lot too, there's grieving, there's grief, there is the shedding of that onion and all of the feelings that come up as a result of our changing. Like I was sharing earlier, my relationships did change, even with those closest to me within my family, and are still changing. For
Mhm.
us as humans who, again, don't like change, the process of change is uncomfortable. So, walking the journey, for some of us, we build the mountain and we imagine the worst case scenario and we don't even try to change. And for those
Correct.
of us who try, do go through those layers of shedding and all of the grieving that comes along with it.
Hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit of some of the other work that you do. You talk about the inner child, the ego, trauma bonds, which we talked a little bit about trauma bonds at the beginning, setting boundaries. Share a little bit more of, if we want to be self-healers, what are some of the things we need to embrace in our own life?
We can start, I think, with the inner child concept, because I think that's the most kind of daily action that we can create change around.
Hmm.
Again, what is the inner child? It lives in our subconscious, and it really revolves around the conditioned patterns and ways that we, for many of us, of a lifetime, have attempted to meet our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs,
Hmm.
operating under the belief that that which we were modeled in childhood might not always serve us for many different reasons, because we had parents who were limited in their own abilities to care for their physical, emotional, and spiritual selves, because of possibly the environments that we grew up in, where there possibly were traumas and woundings and difficulties that were happening, etc. So what inner child work really entails, and the process of actioning differently in adulthood through reparenting, is relearning 2 steps: how to first recognize our needs in those areas, and that is a step. As someone myself who spent a lot of time, as I call it, on my spaceship, really simply disconnected from my physical body, as I began to create safety in my body to consciously drop in and kick around and see what was going on in there, I, Lillian, had no idea really how to tend to my body's individual needs in terms of nutrition, sleep. I didn't really know how to create change in those areas to set my body up to feel its best. Now, this might also be surprising to hear from a trained clinical psychologist who I can't even tell you how long I was in school training for psychology. When I went a layer deeper into the world of emotions, I had no idea. So here I was, right, a doctor of emotions, trying to teach people how to regulate their own emotions. And when I dropped into my body and started to feel the energies and the emotions that were alive in there, I felt, again, overwhelmed. I felt unsure how to navigate my emotional world. So in adulthood, like I said, many of us, the process is 2-step. First, becoming conscious to the old ways we've attempted to meet those needs. From that conscious space, learning how to witness ourselves by just simply noticing, what are your daily habits? How do you care for your body? And then more importantly, how does it feel as a result? And then again, diving a layer deeper, how about emotionally? Do you have any sense of what your emotions are? And then furthermore, how to tend to them, how to release them, right, in a healthy way? Or do you find yourself using older coping tools, dissociating, maybe like I did, possibly externalizing, yelling, screaming, projecting it outward everywhere? Most of us, when we do that assessment as adults, we see the areas where we can create new habits. And that's what the process of reparenting is. Showing up now as our wise adult self, right? And teaching, relearning habits in those areas that better serve us and the relationships around us now, as opposed to, right, operating from those old habits and patterns that typically no longer serve us.
You're right. They supported us when we were kids because the world revolved around us. But now that we're adults, the world does not revolve around us, and we've got to shift, because if we don't, then we will continue to get more and more frustrated that, the world isn't changing for our need. So I love how you explain. I love the story of you as a child running around your table with your mom. You share a story about your mom waiting for your dad, and your dad always was very punctual. And the story ends like with, it's like, would you like to share a little bit about the story?
Absolutely. So again, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear as a child. It really mapped onto the anxiety in the household. My mom in particular, who had a lot of anxiety around health. My mom, when she was in her early 20s, her father dropped dead of a massive heart attack. So here one day, gone the next, extremely traumatizing. I have an older sister who's 15 years older than me, who had her own serious health conditions, including when I was on or about 3 years old. She had to have a throat reconstructive surgery and was unable to speak for about 6 months. So there was a lot of actual health concern in the house. So my mom's anxiety was very high. My dad had a very structured job. He literally left at the same time every morning and came home at the same time every night. And to a very large extent, my mom's anxiety hinged on my dad's consistency, because when he came home as expected, she, could release her concern that something might happen to him, right? He could not come home alive in one piece, etc. So there was a very poignant moment where I have a memory of, we were able to see the way I grew up in a city, and my dad took public transportation to work, and you were able to watch his route from where the bus stop was that he would jump on every morning and get off every afternoon, and you would see him walk down my neighbor's hill and then up to our house. And that just so happened to be viewable from the window where my mom would cook dinner to be ready again the same time every night. So as a child, none of this was spoken. I think this is what is a really powerful thing to consider. It's not just what is directly said to us in childhood that impacts us, because all of the story I share was happening non-verbally.
Correct.
One particular evening, my dad was significantly late. He wasn't home at his normal 5:30 time. And I remember, feeling the anxiety increase as I watched my mom very worriedly looking out the window, just waiting to see my dad come. And what I was doing at the time is I was riding a little like bike thing that I had around my kitchen table. And what I imagine I was doing at the time was trying to expend my own anxious energy. I was tuning into my mom, whose anxiety was elevated in worry and concern.
You could feel it. We could
I
feel
could
it.
feel it. My mom was not paying attention to me for all intents and purposes, because she was attending to her own anxiety and her need for relief right at the sight of my father. So what I again was doing as a kid, which mirrored a pattern I then retained as a kid. I was active. As my parents say, I was always bouncing off the walls. Nicole, I'm bored LePera. If you're not moving and shaking, right, you're driving us crazy. And for me, I now understand all of that. That energy expenditure was my valve. And then the moment shifts when my dad becomes visible over the hill. So in that moment, a couple things really became clear to me. I was having a feeling and my mom was unable to tend to me because she was literally unable to. She was so caught up in her own fear that I wasn't even really present to her in any way. Though she wasn't malicious. She's a very well-intentioned, loving mom who this to her was probably news that I was even upset under the table picking up on this. I learned a second major lesson in that moment, that I watched my mom, and therefore I feel better when someone else is involved. I can obtain my relief right by my dad's presence because my mom's anxiety shifted. So from that moment, and it wasn't just that moment, Lillian, it was many moments where similar things happened. My mom tending to her anxiety, or my family tending to their anxiety, and me being over here. And then when the external, stressor leaves or returns, everything is calm. So I created a similar habit and pattern that I think a lot of us do, of looking outside of myself for that relief that I retained until I began my own healing journey in adulthood.
Yeah, but it takes, I'm sure that story came out like, oh my goodness, where did this story come from? And then you can look at all the patterns that have come from there, that you were trapped, that were trapped in your body, and it filtered everything you saw from that point on without even knowing. I just think it's fascinating that you are a generational pattern shifter. You could have continued with all your trapped traumas and reacting and overreacting, but you made a conscious decision, which I believe is part of your mission with the self-healing movement, which is make that choice for yourself to go back there and tend to that little child so that you can see, oh, this is where it came from. It's beautiful. It's beautiful that, and I appreciated you sharing that story, because one would look at that story and say, okay, there was no screaming, no yelling, no anything, but the emotions that we absorb without even knowing, that get trapped in the pain bodies that Eckhart Tolle talks about, and all these different people that, this pain that we find ourselves in, you give us permission through your story to release those as well. So thank you so much for that.
Of course. And I would be lying if I said that those patterns aren't there, aren't still there. There's still many moments where, so my narrative that got wrapped up around that, one of them is I'm not considered. And there are still moments where things in my current environment, I hear that voice. I hear that, oh, of course, Nicole, this is another evidence of how you're not considered. Because in that moment in childhood, right, I felt unconsidered, because to a large extent I was. So I just like to speak that, because I think a lot of us have this idea that, oh, okay, I know my pattern now, boop, it should just vanish and go. So I'm here to offer that I've been aware of this pattern and I've been creating change around it. And there are still moments where that thought is offered, I'm not considered, and where I do still choose to indulge it. And then I shift out and I remind myself otherwise, of course.
Well, I love it. I love it, because I took myself too. I was unlovable, and that was my self-talk, unlovable, good for nothing. And the good for nothing was told by my second grade teacher. It's a story I tell a lot. So it's a good for nothing. And then my grandmother said if I stopped learning how to play the piano, she would stop loving me. But I made up that I was unlovable. I made up up all these things about ourselves. And once you go back there and you do the work, you'll find out that there are a lot of lies that we have been dragging with us, and we don't want to deal with it, but we still drag the lies with us like a 50-pound stack of a potato. If we could just deal with it and work with it, we would find that more awareness and more openness and abundance comes our way when we do. And I like your reminder, and I'm so grateful that there are people like you out there letting us know that we are empowered to take our health back, spirit, mind, and soul. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, Lillian, for having this classroom and doing the same.
Yes, yes. And stay tuned, because we're going to continue our conversation. We have a tiny little teacher's pet. So if you have any questions, type a Q, write your questions, and we will ask them to Dr. LePera. And please remember that the book, 407-373-5959, on the 9th, we're going to pick 3 people. I almost say 5. We'll pick 3 people to start doing their self-healing, but you can always buy it yourself at Amazon.com or anywhere you want. Okay, so this is it for now. Please remember, I'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lillian McDermott and Dr. Nicole LePera wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best day ever. Good job. Good job.
The opinions and advice expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.
Okay, so I think this is great. I can't do enough of these classes. I can't do enough of them. So anytime I know that you don't need to come on to my class, but anytime you want to come on, you have an open invitation. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
I appreciate that. And thank you for continuing to show up in these classes and house these conversations and open the door of curiosity and possibility for all of the humans that you do.
Thank you.
Because it really is serving the collective, Lillian. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it's nice that our paths came together and that we can continue knowing that someone else it's like you think you're alone doing this. And all of a sudden you're revealed a battalion of people that are doing the same work that you're doing. And it's so reinforcing that it's because once you start changing, you could either be embraced by your family or they can sabotage you. Did you find that as you started changing your patterns, people started feeling uncomfortable because now you're behaving in a certain way that may cause them to have to change too?
Absolutely. I mean, I speak a lot and I share in the book that when I came to witness how unboundaried or how little separation I had with myself and my family. So out of those experiences I was describing earlier, we really operated in what is called an enmeshed way. So when there was a stressor, so my mom was dealing with stress, just like I described in that moment, the whole family felt it. So I came to the realization in my adulthood that I had to create some limits, some boundaries, some separation where I was able to honor my unique needs as separate from my family. And in doing that, I began to show up differently, and it was not easy. I heard,
No, especially with your family. That's
right? For our families are difficult, and I'll just explain why. Because the simplest reason being, those are usually the relationships that our relational patternings are based around.
correct.
So when we go back home at the holidays or whenever, a lot of us do feel pulled back into that system and the way of being that worked at that system. So you said something beautiful earlier. Whenever we're looking at our habits and patterns, it really is important to just honor that the service that they provided us, that they were born out of our circumstances at one time. And here's why I say this, because we can carry a lot of shame as we watch these habits and patterns continue. And as we continue to accumulate, right, the consequences of living in those habitual ways. So again, if we can honor compassionately that they showed up for a reason, and like I was sharing, as I began to change, there was a lot of discomfort experienced in my family, especially when I made the very difficult decision to go to decline contact with them, to ask for actually that amount of space so I could have the space in my life to rediscover or to begin to rediscover who I was separate from who I was in relation to the LePeras as I had always been functioning. And that was a incredibly difficult, almost 2 years of my life. Though I made the decision, it did come with a lot of discomfort around it. And I think that This isn't me suggesting that we all need to cut off family. Absolutely not. Though
Mhm.
as our relationships shift and change, like you beautifully voiced, there is discomfort that we carry along the way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your honesty. And I think that that's where, in a world full of 1,000 friends or 1,000,000 friends, we really don't know each other. We don't know what we're going through. We compare our interior to people's exterior. And it's nice to hear, especially nowadays where we live in such a plastic world, a physical, and maybe it's just my judgment of it, that it's all about the physical, not about the emotional side. And it's like you cannot live a life when there is no emotion in you, because eventually you'll start breaking down, and things will start happening to your body. Because I just interviewed Bradley Nelson, Dr. Bradley Nelson. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but
Mm-mm.
he blew me away. He was doing some work with me on the air about past trauma. And so it's called the emotion code. That's who Bradley Nelson
Oh, I know
is.
that. Okay.
Okay.
I put his name. I read that book. Yes. Okay.
Yes, the emotion code. There you go. So he started doing with me, and all the past trauma that I had was from like my ancestry, my mom, my dad, 1,500 years ago, some person and I'm like, enough. I'm not carrying these people around with me. I don't need to go one by one. I'm done. I'm getting these people out because I need to deal with my own stuff. My own stuff is what we need to deal with. Do you find that when you start digging into past trauma work, as you are reading about Bradley Nelson and the emotion code and all the traumas that we don't even know that we have in our body, do you feel that as people become aware, their diseases just go away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot. I mean, let me go back in time. All of this is transmitted intergenerationally. These are habits and patterns. So to speak to your point, many of us are carrying in our physiology. When I'm saying they impact us, it is does map into how our genetics, how our genes, how our bodies are operating, how our stress system in particular. And now we do have scientifically grounded evidence that there are, physiological changes that are transferred down in our lineages. So a lot of us in our bones essentially could be carrying the after effects of something that happened generations before us. So I just like to speak to that point because I know this is the area where some of us can get defined as woo woo. What are you talking about? This is the spirit. So if you don't believe in that aspect of it, here I am suggesting that there actually is the physiology that changes. So as we create change, of course, it's becoming a witness, though it also is then changing our physiology. So it's not as simple as becoming aware, I think, like we've been talking about. That's why just changing a thought doesn't work. We actually have to change our being. And for some of us, that means our physiology. Though to speak to the point you made earlier, right, calling anyone who's doing the work a generation breaker,
Mhm.
changer, that is what this is. Because when my physiology, my being changes, if I were, I mean, the impact will, ripple to all of the relationships in my orbit, even beyond. And if I were to have children, though that is not a plan in my future, then that would actually impact them at the genetic level. So when we're talking about creating change and how not only possible is that, but how impactful that is then for our future lineages, we're actually talking about changing our being.
Yeah, it's so exciting to talk about this with someone who understands the work, has done the work. And I just absolutely want to acknowledge you with that. And so before we go, because I know that we need to get off I wanted to ask you about breath work, because you do talk about breath work. It's very important in the work that you do. When you're doing breath work, a lot of people don't know how to breathe. I spend a little bit of time on my workshop that I do about teaching people how to breathe. Have you found that many of your clients and maybe the people that find you, that they're just learning how to breathe properly? Would you like to share how breath work is done?
So breath is one of those sneaky things that happen outside of our awareness. So before long, and as we transition into adulthood, many of us shift from in infancy. Anyone who's had spent any time around an infant can see that when they're breathing really deeply from their bellies. Their little bellies are actually expanding and deflating. typically by the time we transition into adulthood, we shifted our breath up into our chest area.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I'm talking about the breath is because the mind and the body are connected. So our breath patterning, whether we're breathing from that chest or from that deep belly area, is actually sending signals to our brain. And our breath is important because it actually can help us to regulate our nervous system. And when we're breathing from that very shallow chest-based place, we're actually sending signals of being in a stressed state, because that's what happens when our body and our nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, is activated.
Mm-hmm.
So as I began to drop into my body, I saw that. I witnessed that to be true. I breathed very shallowly. I also had a habit of holding my breath when I was stressed.
Mm-hmm.
If we can learn to harness a deeper belly breath and retrain our system, and the reason why the belly is important is because that activates what is known as our opposing, if you will, nervous system. Not the sympathetic that activates us, but the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, that quite literally allows our body to do those things. Again, sending the signals to our mind that we are not stressed out and we are in a calm state. So if we can become conscious of our breath, we can localize where we're breathing from. And if you do notice that you really do tend to breathe shallow, and if you also notice that you tend to be an anxious person, changing that pattern, harnessing that deep belly breath can go an incredibly long way of creating the balance in the body. So that, like I said, over time, signals of balance, of peace, can begin to travel upwards, and then we can actually feel that emotionally.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nicole LePera, for everything that you're doing. The book is called How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. It is out on March 9th. I'm sure it's going to be a very successful launch. And 3 of you will win. Just need to claim that you want to do your work and text me at 407-373-5959. You can also go to yourholisticpsychologist.com to learn more about Dr. Nicole LePera. And please remember to go to whenyounneedafriend.com and also subscribe. Thank you so much. Share this information and we're going to continue to grow together. Thank you so much, Dr. LePera. Is there any last things that you want to say?
No, thank you. And I
Okay.
guess I will end on, what you started on with, just honoring. And I really appreciate anyone who took the time to listen to our conversation today, because that's where you're at on your journey. And that's a great place to be.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so we'll say goodbye to all of you on